Lovers of lore, thank you for joining me for the third installment of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan story. This part of the story starts out with Quintorius and Weta chasing the ghost that Quintorius had just animated. The ghost abruptly stopped running when they rounded a corner beside an underground river. The reason became immediately evident. A giant beast made of layered mushrooms. The ghost yelled a single terrified word, "Titan!" and then disappeared in a burst of purple and pink. Weta, being a warrior, stepped forward to protect Quintorius. The Titan tore down a nearby wall and launched it at Weta. She barely got out of the way. The impact of the wall still showered her with rocks, leaving her bloodied. She charged the Titan, coming in low as it reached for her. She darted behind it and hamstrung the Titan, but it had no effect on the fungal beast. Weta was then joined by Huatli and the Imperial soldiers. They came charging into battle, but it did little good. The fungal Titan was unstoppable. They speared it, cut it with swords, ran it through, even hacked chunks off of its body, but the Titan showed no signs of even feeling it. The beast's wounds flowed with a thick black fluid that clumped together and burst into new fungus. The Titan yanked a spear from its own chest and swung it at one of the warriors. While the Titan did miss with the spear, the warrior still got caught by the Titan's arm and slammed into a wall. She died on impact. The Titan spat black viscousness that landed on a warrior and ate through his armor and then through his chest. Quintorius spotted a new problem. 6 mini-Titans came lumbering into the fight. Some of them wielded weapons pilfered from corpses. The ones that didn't were still deadly. They plucked mushrooms from their body and threw them. The mushrooms burst into creeping black mold that raced along the bodies of warriors, choking them as it grew into their mouths and lungs. Weta was terrified, but that terror was short-lived as waves leapt out of the underground river. Some waves knocked down mini-Titans. Others carried merfolk. In the blink of an eye, 6 river heralds stood brandishing jade weaponry. The river heralds proposed evacuating them. The fight here was lost. They cleared a path to the river, and then the merfolk's magic covered them in an air pocket, and they were hurried into the river. The story then shifts to Malcolm. He's been moving deeper into the mines under the mining camp. Malcolm is uneasy. The part of his pirate crew that fought those dinosaurs had changed. The blackness on their skin had spread, and now it glowed with a sickly light. They didn't complain at all, which was very weird for pirates. They mostly just seemed disinterested in everything, although on occasion, one of them would take a keen interest in the area around them. The smell of rot down here had grown much stronger. The elevator they were on stopped with a jerk. There was a large mushroom that blocked the way. One of the pirates hacked at it, and green spores glittered in the air as the mushroom burst. That pirate started to choke on those spores. At the same time, the infected pirates leapt forward, pushing 2 of the unaffected pirates directly into the spore cloud. They started to hack and sputter as their lungs churned up fungal blackness. They fell to their knees, and when they rose, it was jerkily, glassy-eyed, and Malcolm drew his sword and double-checked his bandana was still securely on his face. Malcolm's men pulled out their weapons, and Breeches yelled, "Big boom?" Malcolm shook his head. "These quarters are too tight. We would all die." Malcolm then leapt out of the elevator and flew up to the ropes above the elevator. Breeches clambered up after him, yelling, "Escape!" The infected pirates had made short work of Malcolm's men, and they turned their eyes upward. Malcolm and Breeches started to saw frantically at the ropes holding the elevator, while the infected pirates started to climb up the sides of it. They barely got the ropes cut in time, sending the elevator along with the infected pirates hurtling down into the darkness. At that point, Malcolm and Breeches made their way back upwards, with Malcolm trying to figure out what could do this to dinosaurs and men. The story switches to Bartolome, who was considering his secret mission to spy on Vito for the Queen. Where had Vito gotten that spear and journal? It appeared the opposition to his queen was much bigger than originally hoped. Vito had turned from the church. What if this bat god did the same? His thoughts were interrupted by an alarm. 24 impossibly tall cat warriors surrounded the vampires. "You will come with us, or you will die," one said with authority. Bartolome cautioned Vito, "Diplomacy will serve us best." Vito warned Bartolome not to undermine him, but ordered his troops to stand down. The cat warriors escorted them to their city named Bankaj. The city was built into stalactites as large as mountains. Rope bridges were connected between buildings, as well as netting. Bartolome was anxious. Escape from this place would be impossible for anyone but the few here who could fly. They were marched to the largest stalactite, which, unlike the others, had no buildings or windows carved into it. Instead, a dizzying array of glowing glyphs covered it. Inside the stalactite was an enormous carved pyramid. This was the home of the king. He sat on his throne, a giant cat warrior, fully armored and toying with a massive serrated blade. This was Okenek Ahau, and he cut quite the impressive figure. Okenek spoke. "Why are you in my realm?" Vito decided to feign friendliness. "We're just pilgrims passing through. We're on a journey to the land of Aklizots, the bat god." Okenek was not having it. "I am the only god here." He waved forward one of his servants, a mythweaver named Pak. "Pak will discern the truth." Pak spoke a single word, and swirling green mist formed, showing the image of a snarling face. The face could see Pak and leapt forward, trying to bite him. Pak dismissed the spell and shook his head at the king. Okenek damned them with his next words. "Give them to the sand." The vampires drew their weapons, but the cat warriors were already prepared for the king's edict. Glyphs hung in the air that leapt out and bound the vampires. Vito stared daggers at Bartolome, clearly blaming him for this turn of events. Kellen yelled about this being unfair, but Okenek was unmoved. The fire doesn't concern itself with fairness, it simply burns. The bound vampires were carried to a fountain that flowed full of sand instead of water. Vito was thrown in first. "My God will protect me," were his last words. Some vampires screamed as they were thrown in. Some silently accepted their fate. Amalia's eyes were blank, and she was talking wordlessly to herself again. But just before she slipped under the sands, she told Kellen, who was panicking beside her, to hold his breath. Bartolome witnessed it all and hoped that Amalia had just experienced another vision. Otherwise, this expedition was at its end. Vito was right. Bartolome knew he was to blame for this. As he sunk in the sand, he consoled himself by thinking about the fact that if this was the end, at least he had gotten rid of Vito. The story then returns to Wada, Quintorius, and Huatli. The River Heralds had successfully helped them escape. They were taken to a giant city crafted from stone. It sat inside a freshwater, underground ocean. The city teemed with thousands of merfolk. Their guide introduced herself as Nakanzel and explained that this is the greatest gathering of river heralds there has ever been. They were awaiting the opening of the final gate to the Saurus. This caused Huatli to wonder if they had arrived at Matzalanli. Would they find the doorway to the gods here? Quint was excited about the possible connections to the Coin Empire and all the artifacts that could be excavated. Wada objected at first, thinking it pillaging to take what doesn't belong to you. But Quintorius explained the objects wouldn't be taken from Ixalan, they would be put on display. A concept Wada found funny. Once the idea was framed as sharing stories, Wada realized it was similar to what Huatli did as the warrior poet, and she subsided. She still did worry about what will be on the other side of that door. The story returns to Malcolm. His muscles ached from overuse, and he had an intense headache from all the magic he had used. He had learned something of what had happened to the miners. Obviously, it was related to the fungus, but that knowledge came at a great cost. All of his men were gone. He was left with the dejected breeches. If Malcolm turned back now, he would have only partial answers for Vance. And also, if he left, the mine was doomed. Nobody would come to work there after all the previous workers disappeared like that. Plus, there might still be some folks alive, and Malcolm liked the people of downtown, and he really liked making money from the mine. Malcolm asked Breeches his thoughts. No mine, no gold. Still, Malcolm was considering leaving. Suddenly, fungus started to race along the tunnel walls, but it was spelling out words, safe and down, in huge glowing letters. Was this a truce or a trap? Malcolm didn't know, but he held on to hope. Back with Amalia, she had been engulfed by sand. Holding her breath, she could feel the sand filling her nose and ears. She was terrified, and that terror brought on more visions. She could see the door. It was actually copper with green corrosion. She could see it so clearly now. A burning bright sphere with chunks of broken armor floating around it, with a purple-pink hue to it. Come to me, a voice spoke to Amalia, and then she was falling somehow. The fall ended with a splash. They had ended up in the lands of the River Heralds. The vampires were quickly surrounded by merfolk, demanding their surrender. Vito was livid. Kellen bemoaned. 3 ambushes in one day? Come on! Amalia laughed. You shouldn't make it a habit. Kellen splashed her, and the vampires were shepherded by the River Heralds towards an unknown fate. All right, my friends, that ends the 3rd installment of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan story. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you like what we're doing here, you can support the channel by joining the channel membership or our Patreon. Big thank you to the channel's patrons and channel members. You guys rule. The next installment of this story comes out tomorrow. Come on back and check it out. In the meantime, go and watch some more stories on this channel because remember, my friends, lore is life.